The initial prompt that we gave ChatGPT is what engineering flaws contributed to the Boeing 737 MAX MCAS ineffectiveness, and how could those have been corrected preemptively before original construction and distribution? ChatGPT gives us a couple different answers. The first reason given is over-reliance on a single AOA sensor. It talks about how the MCAS depends on data from a single AOA sensor and would activate erroneously, as it did in both major crashes. A solution given would be a redundancy in sensor design or automatic sensor health monitoring. The second issue it gives is aggressive MCAS activation. The flaw is that once activated, MCAS could push the nose down by up to 2.5 degrees, overriding pilot inputs and leading to loss of control. Solution would be less aggressive activation logic or pilot override. Another listed flaw is the lack of pilot awareness and training that went into this aircraft. Pilots were not adequately trained on MCAS or its failure modes, which left them unprepared when the system did malfunction. There should have been better training and documentation and clearer communication with airlines. A fourth flaw is insufficient testing and certification, as the FAA's certification process was criticized for lacking thorough reveal of MCAS's failure modes. There were also inadequate software safeguards and alerts. There were no immediate cockpit warnings when MCAS activated, nor was there any indication that the AOA sensor was even malfunctioning. There should have been more transparent feedback and warnings and alerts in place. Another listed problem is the impact of larger engines. The 737 MAX's larger engines altered the aerodynamics, which made MCAS necessary. However, the system was implemented without fully understanding its impact on the aircraft behavior. There should have been more thorough integration testing or a potential holistic aircraft redesign. In conclusion, ChatGPT tells us that the MCAS system was critical for the 737 MAX, but had several flaws, which led to its failure. To prevent these issues, Boeing could have introduced better sensor redundancy, designed a more gradual intervention system, improved pilot training, and conducted more thorough testing. A follow-up prompt that I give is about the cockpit confusion that the pilots of the 737 MAXes that crashed must have been feeling. They were faced with intense cockpit confusion due to the unexpected behavior of the system. They were not aware that MCAS existed or how it worked, so when it malfunctioned, they struggled to identify the issue. They were confused with all the alarms going off, and the MCAS could be overridden temporarily by pulling back on the control column, but the pilots were not trained on this procedure. They ended up being overwhelmed by physical strain, conflicting information, and a lack of understanding of the system. They did not know what was going on, so they were unable to regain control, which led to the crashes.
Okay, so in this section, I will provoke ethical controversy through a question that I asked AI, and that is, can you answer this question from the perspective of someone who suffered loss because of these flights? From the perspective of someone who suffered loss of a loved one in the Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 or Lion Air Flight 610, the question of epistemic benefit from the Boeing 737 MCAS. MCAS system's failure is deeply painful and morally complex. The knowledge gained from these tragedies may serve the future of aviation and potentially prevent future disasters. But for those who lost family members, the cost of this knowledge is immeasurable, and the question of whether any benefit justifies the loss of human life is a source of profound and emotional ethical struggle. So I'm going to just keep it short. So consequentialist response that I give, it sort of is a form of utilitarianism developed by Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mills, and it serves the purpose to sort of like utilitarianism to promote happiness and pleasure, but it goes further and advances the effort to conversely mitigate displeasure and determines the wrongfulness of action based on the consequences it imposes. The deliberation that provoked consequentialism was Boeing's decision to decrease the time to market with the Boeing 737 MAX amidst a growing concern of evident design flaws. It is quite obvious to say that the fatalities that took place throughout these accidents imposes great consequences for those on board, but also for those who suffered the tragic loss. In these cases, the means does not justify the end, and the consequences far exceed any seeming justification or intent. Ethics, immorality. Summary: it was immoral for Boeing leadership to engage in such secrecy amongst flights 737, amongst pilots flying the 737 MAX, and immoral to ignore the concerns of Boeing staff. It was unethical to undermine potential issues and mask the foreseen dangers for the sake of efficiency and increased profit. Yet, a culmination of responsibility makes it difficult to solely appoint blame to a single organization, company, or job title. It may be easier for us with no connection to the crashes to say accidents happen, but if no reform is to be undertaken to mitigate these mistakes, it is plausible that that crashes with similar causes will continue to happen. Unfortunately, the most impactful and lasting lessons can be learned at the most tragic expense. Therefore, it is imperative that the highest degree of care is taken to ensure the safety of passengers moving forward. Thank you. Bye.
So I asked ChatGPT about the overall impact of the plane crashes at the local and national levels, and it responded, "The crashes of Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302 and Lion Air Flight 610 had profound impacts both at the local level and at the national level. These impacts went beyond the immediate loss of lives and touched on social, economic, psychological, and political spheres." Said, for local impact, there was the emotional and psychological toll on families and communities, so just talking about grief. There was the economic impact. It talks about the Ethiopian Airlines crash in particular, leading to a reduction in business and tourism activities, and Lion Air having to deal with scrutiny, loss of confidence, and legal liabilities. There's loss of trust in local institutions. So this is just saying the public was upset with like the national airline authorities and the maintenance practices of the airlines. National impact, there was the political and regulatory fallout in both countries. There was increased demands and like better domestic aviation oversight and better alignment with international standards. There was an impact on international relations. This is basically talking about how the governments of both countries had to balance their relations with Boeing while prioritizing like the demands and calls for like national safety concerns. Finally, there's the social impact, which just talks about how the crashes raised national conversations on air travel safety and how that was framed within the broader context of global aviation safety. Overall, I feel like it gave a pretty solid response. I talk about like a couple of things it did wrong in the summary, but I think the most obvious one, it was under emotional and psychological toll on families and communities. Basically, ChatGPT argues that the deaths resulted from a preventable malfunction, whereas we learned in class it was more just a design flaw on Boeing's part, with putting the MCAS there on top of just Boeing not, despite warnings from engineers, Boeing not telling pilots, giving them the adequate information about the MCAS and properly teaching them how to fly this like new model of plane. So that is like the serious issue I took with ChatGPT's response. Other than that, everything was pretty good. So the final part of our essay basically discusses how we thought ChatGPT did with the prompts we gave it. And overall, we gave it a pretty good grade. For part one, it did a good job at answering the prompt and giving potential correction for the flaws it identified, albeit the first flaw it identified was a little obvious. It was well informed regarding FAA certification processes and review, although it was vague on the cockpit confusion, somewhat misinformed. It didn't discuss the flight path oscillation that went down on the specific alarm sensors. And other than that, it did a pretty good job with part one. Part two, judging like the utilitarian perspectives, it did an adequate job. Part three, again, ChatGPT did mostly well. Aside from the part I already mentioned about ChatGPT characterizing the cause of the crashes as a malfunction, and it also, this is just my own personal opinion, I think ChatGPT could have done a better job talking about the impact of the crashes on the victims' families. There's one relatively small part where it discusses this, even though in ChatGPT's summary that it provided me, it says grief was like a big part of the crash. So that's something to be desired. Other than that, ChatGPT, you did a pretty good job at helping us with our essay. Thank you very much. Dr. Bezad, have a very good break, and we hope you enjoyed this essay. Thank you for watching.